it wasn't enough to calm things down.
Oh my God. A police van pushed protesters back in Alexandria, Egypt, but nothing has contained the anger spilling out all over the city. They lit vehicles on fire, attacked police stations, and rioted in the streets. An army commander warned a crowd of thousands in Cairo to stay inside once night fell. But many ignored the 4 p.m. curfew. President Hosni Mubarak swore in a vice president for the first time in 30 years, suggesting that the violent protests may have forced the leader to devise a succession plan. The U.S. had urged Mubarak to take concrete action before the new vice president was announced. Hundreds of protesters gathered at the United Nations Saturday afternoon, one of more than a dozen demonstrations across the U.S.
Enough is enough. People are killing each other in Egypt, and you're using the army against the people now.
The protesters say they came here to express solidarity with the people protesting on the streets in Egypt and to call on the Obama administration to take a tougher stand. More protesters gathered in Paris, London, and Beirut. At the White House, President Obama met with his national security team. The president reiterated the need for Egypt to use restraint against the uprising. At the United Nations, Scott Goldberg for CBS News.
And protesters also gathered today in Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Chicago, and 7 other U.S. cities. Coming up in about 10 minutes, a local expert on the situation in Egypt will join us in studio for some perspective on what's behind the protests. Well, medical examiners will soon try to match a body found in Tempe Town Lake with that of a missing ASU student, Willie Jigba. Jigba was last seen leaving a party on January 15th. His parents, who live in California, have been waiting to see if the body is indeed that of their son. I spoke with Jigba's father, Emmanuel, on the phone just a little while ago. He lives in California. He's also the author of Life, Death, and Community in Cairo's City of the Dead. And Hassan Ansah joins us right now in the CBS 5 studios. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Now, we've heard that the reason for the protest is people are angry with the Egyptian government. What specifically are they not happy about?
Well, you have deep entrenched inequities that lie in the economic system of Cairo, in the political system of Cairo, in the social fabric of Cairo. This is nothing new. What is new is basically the ability to have a voice, to speak out against that, and the courage and the fortitude of the people to speak out against that. This is a secular rebellion, which encompasses a grassroots movement in Egypt, and that's really not being covered or really being focused on by a lot of my colleagues in Egypt.
Because a lot of times when we're talking about the Arab world, it has to do with religion. But this case, you're saying, it has nothing to do with religion. It's about people getting, fair wages, for example, things like that.
People getting fair wages. Another very poignant aspect of this revolution, as I would call it, that has not been looked at are the women and the role that the women are playing in this, in being a catalyst in this spark. Very important role. Women have had better access to education, they have been more economically empowered, and they have also been having more access to public facilities as far as jobs are concerned. So that has given them more of a voice in the Egyptian society and the ability to spark this revolution that you're seeing.
I was going to ask, is this the start of a revolution? You say unequivocally yes.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Even if it doesn't come to a conclusion within the next 6 months, even to a year, what has been started will never be renounced. It could never go back to what it was.
Do you think it leads to democracy in Egypt? Because right now it's sort of it's almost like a dictatorship.
I will say this, Peter, and you have a lot of fear coming from the United States as far as a concern about getting a non-secular, fundamentalist government. The Egyptian people and culture as a whole are far too inclusive, far too adaptive, and far too secular to ever have a government on the level of Iran or even a fundamentalist government such as Saudi Arabia.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sorry we had to cut it short here, but I really appreciate the insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. All over the city. They lit vehicles on fire, attacked police stations, and rioted in the streets.
This is because they feel that this is their country, this is what they have to do.
An army commander warned a crowd of thousands in Cairo to stay inside once night fell. But many ignored the 4 p.m. curfew. President Hosni Mubarak swore in a vice president for the first time in 30 years, suggesting that the violent protests may have forced the leader to devise a succession plan. The U.S. had urged Mubarak to take concrete action before the new vice president was announced. Egyptian Americans planned simultaneous demonstrations at the United Nations, calling on the Obama administration to take a tougher stand. Capital City, Elizabeth.
Hassan Ansah spent 2 years working as a photojournalist in Cairo, so he had a front row seat to all of the events that led up to the uprising.
This has been building up for the last 10 years.
Hassan Ansah watched as tensions built in Egypt, erupting in the images you see today.
Economic inequities, political, nepotism, and extreme gender discrimination.
All factors Ansah says culminated in chaos.
People are just tired of living under oppressive circumstances.
Hassan says one gender in particular is behind this.
The women are playing an intricate role in this uprising. The women have become much more educated, much more empowered.
And sick of the current regime. While these images are startling, Ansah believes it's a necessary evil.
It's not going to be easy, but transformation is needed, change is needed at this deeper level, and yes, I believe it's going to be a good thing.
A good thing in the end, he says, but for now, his thoughts are with friends still in Egypt.
I'm worried about them, but I told them, you know, our wishes are with them, they're doing the right thing to be, you know, have the fortitude.
The strength for the outcome, Ansah says, is inevitable.
I believe democracy is next for Egypt. Maybe not in the style of the West, or Europe, or the United States, but a much more liberalized society.
And coming up tomorrow morning on Face the Nation, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton will make a guest appearance. And you can imagine, Peter, that this conflict in Egypt is going to be a hot topic there. You can catch it right here on CBS 5. We're live, Elizabeth Irwin, CBS 5 News, telling it like it is.
All right, thanks, Elizabeth. Now up to Flagstaff, where carbon in Egypt are game changers in world history. So we're dedicating the next half hour to answering two questions. How did this start, and where is it headed? Let's begin tonight with reporter Elias Johnson, who has the latest developments from Egypt.
Peter, good evening. The violence today was down compared to this bloody past week, thanks in large part to talks between the current government and opposition groups. It appears Egyptian leaders promised to form a committee to set term limits and let more candidates run for president, a small step towards much-needed constitutional reform. Egypt's most famous tourist attractions stand largely quiet. Few are visiting the Great Pyramid and Sphinx in Giza. 10 miles northeast in Cairo, signs of normal life are returning. Traffic flowed through the street, shop owners resumed sales, and some schools and banks opened. But not in the center of town, where protesters lined up after work trying to enter Tahrir Square. The military stepped up security around demonstrators, exerting pressure to get commerce going after nearly 2 weeks of rallies. Egyptian Vice President Omar Suleiman met with opposition groups for the first time, offering new concessions: freedom of the press, the release of detained protesters, and the eventual lifting of emergency laws that give the government dictatorial powers.
All your demands, all your requests, we respond positively, and we promise that we will do.
Protesters and even opposition leaders who took part in the talks welcome the promise of change, but want President Mubarak out of office now.